one of the upper grade reading books, there was a story about a Coast Guard rescue on Lake Michigan out of Chicago. And I thought that sounded like it was more exciting than teaching school. So I did write and ask the Coast Guard if they took women. This was before they did. Somebody wrote back and said no.
And where were you at in boot camp?
In Palm Beach, Florida. We lived in the Biltmore Hotel, but it wasn't much better than a barracks. We didn't do any of the strenuous things that they do now, and our drill instructors were nice people. They didn't yell at us. They treated us nicely.
Were there a lot of women that joined in 43 when you joined?
Well, there were only 10,000 during the whole, enlisted during the whole war, so there were, I think there were just two classes of boots that started every 2 or 3 weeks. We went just for 4 weeks.
And what were the women in the Coast Guard? What were you called?
Spars.
Spars.
And spar is made out of the Coast Guard slogan, Semper Paratus, which means always ready.
Always ready.
And the captain that was over the whole bunch of spars, she was the one that thought up the name. I think it was more to be patriotic. We didn't think about that we were trailblazers for the future, but it turned out that way. But it was really more of an adventure. I was teaching Coast Guard organization. They had activities and personnel, I guess, were the other two. The one I was teaching was the most boring. But it was fun. Once they decided we had too many instructors in both there and in Yeoman and Storekeeper School. So they asked for volunteers to leave. She didn't want to just pick somebody out to leave. But I decided I'd been in Florida long enough. I might as well see some more of the country. So I didn't know where I was going, but I did volunteer. We were all sent down to the district office to get assigned jobs, and women were just starting to come out there in that district, so they were kind of making up jobs as they went along. We were overqualified to be filing clerks, but we didn't know anything about the rest of the office work. So they sent us back to the barracks, and we became part of the maintenance team. We swabbed the deck and vacuumed the stairs and stood 8-hour daytime fire watches and ran the elevator. So it wasn't too bad a job. I learned to vacuum the stairway from the 8 floors there, and they didn't have fire doors on them. I could vacuum the stairway by just plugging the vacuum in once. I'd go up to the top in the elevator, drop the cord down to the 4th floor, go down and plug it in, and go back, and I could work my way all the way down to the bottom. We really had an advantage over the office workers because our hours were from 6 in the morning till 2 or from 2 till 10 at night, so we had time to explore the city in the daytime. And they had a horse patrol along the beach, and we found out we could go and exercise some of their extra horses, so we went out there a few times and rode the horses. Peggy and I decided we could contribute a little more to the Coast Guard, so we applied to go to radio school, where we knew the company commander had gone there. So I wrote her a letter and asked about it, and she wrote back right away and said, "Don't come. The work is hard, the hours are long, the food's no good." She said, "Well, we do have hot water. One of the girls got scalded when the hose came off the washing machine." But it was too late for us to change our mind. So we went, and it wasn't quite as bad as she said, but it was pretty hard work. We had to learn Morse code, and it wasn't too hard just learning it, but to listen to it and type it was more difficult. And I discovered that that sound was a place on the typewriter rather than a letter that I just automatically remembered, because we did have one class where we used a pencil to copy a code. And I had to find the place on the typewriter and get it back into my mind what that letter was, and by then there were several letters ahead of me. So I didn't do well in that class. But in the written classes that we took, I did real well. So I was able to hang on and graduate from there. We didn't know what was in Cape May, but we chose that. And there was a direction finder station there. We sent bearings out to ships and monitored the call and distress frequency. At that time, what is now the Coast Guard boot camp was a Navy air station. So we had to live on the base in the Waves barracks. And the Waves and the spars, the Coast Guard, aren't real good friends, but we got along all right. For a very short time, I went up to Philadelphia to the district office, and from there I went for even a shorter time to the primary radio station, which was just outside of Philadelphia someplace. And the chief didn't think I ought to be walking to work at midnight, so he just gave me day shifts, although I'd been walking all over Philadelphia while I was there in the middle of the night. Nobody seemed to care about that. But anyway, then one day he said, how would you like to go to Bethany Beach, Delaware? And I don't think I really had any choice, but as far as I was concerned, that was a good place to go. While I was in radio school, I met my husband on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. He was in the Army and stationed over in Lewes, Delaware. So this was only about 15 miles from there. There was absolutely nothing in the town, though. So the other girls that were there weren't too happy being there, but I liked it. I liked to write letters, and I was in Heinz Pier had a little short pier right off the boardwalk. I was sitting there writing letters, and he came in and sat down and waited till I finished my letters before we started talking. So first thing we did was go out and mail my letters I was writing to people that were overseas. We used what was called V-mail, and you had a piece of paper about the size of a sheet of typewriting paper, but you only wrote in the middle. It folded into an envelope, and then they took photos of the stuff and just sent a big roll of photo over there, and then they were printed over there. During the Vietnam War, I started visiting patients at Great Lakes Navy Hospital, and I was not a volunteer. Volunteers have to do what somebody else wants them to when they want to. I had my own schedule. I had my first graders writing letters and sending cards to the patients down there, and my next door neighbor worked on one of the wards down there, and we got a few letters back, so I decided to go down and see what it was like down there, who I was writing to. And so I went down and took chocolate chip cookies, and I liked it so well the first time I was down there, I kept on going about once a week for about 6 years. They started calling me the Coast Guard lady when I was still going down to Great Lakes Hospital, because the other men, while I continued visiting them, they knew that the Coast Guard came first. If there was there were only about half a dozen Coast Guard people there among the 800 or 900 patients, so they knew they were special when I hunted them out. So that's where it started, and I officially, I guess, became the Coast Guard lady when after we moved down here, when I got an award, the Meritorious Public Service Award from Admiral Yost up at Grand Haven, Michigan at their festival, and it had the Coast Guard lady in the write-up about it. I just mostly write letters. Well, we did, whenever we traveled, we would stop at Coast Guard stations to visit. I started out writing to the Loran stations and the lighthouses in Alaska. I had written to their district commander and asked for him to send me some, so he did. So that's really where I got quite involved in writing to Coast Guard, and then they would go to other stations and keep on writing, and I'd find out other addresses, and somebody sent me the directory with all of their addresses in, so I could pick and choose what I wanted. And as I say, it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And when they retired, they kept on writing, and sometimes people will see some write-up about the Coast Guard lady, and a mother will start writing to me, or a wife, or kids, even had a few kids start writing. I had been sending Coast Guard Day letters and Christmas cards to all of them that were in my address file, which about 600 each time, and then anybody that wrote to me in between times, I would answer their letters. So it was, I would say, over 1,000. When people ask me, who I was most impressed with meeting, I said, well, I liked everybody from the boots to the commandants. Two of the commandants have come to my house to visit. The present one and Admiral Papp before him. But I think for a minute, and I think it was meeting Alex Haley. He was over in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, giving a talk at one of the schools there, and so we went over to hear him. And at the end of his talk about his heritage, he asked for questions, and a couple of people asked questions about what he'd been talking about. He had mentioned that he was in the Coast Guard, but he didn't say too much about it. And I asked him, what cutter were you on in the Coast Guard? He started to answer my question, and he said, are you the Coast Guard lady? So that was impressive.
Very impressive.